Prohibitions related to Hajj and Umrah. 5.9. The things that are religiously prohibited for those who have entered Ihram for Hajj or Umrah are called JINAYATU'L-HAJJ equals HAJ. Prohibitions. Here, intent, mistake, error, and forgetfulness are considered the same. According to the Shafi'i school, the penalty for error and forgetfulness is waived. 60. The prohibitions, CINAYET, related to Hajj and Umrah are divided into the following 5 categories. 1. Prohibitions for which the sacrifice of a single dam sheep or goat is required if a person who has reached puberty and is in a state of ihram applies a fragrant substance to a limb, organ, completely or to various parts of a limb in an amount equivalent to that limb, applying henna to their head, applying oil, wearing a sewn garment for a full day until evening or keeping their head covered, having at least 1/4 of their head shaved, removing excess body hair, cutting her nails, neglecting one of the obligatory acts of Hajj, entering IHRAM at the MIKAT, performing the KUDUM or VEDA TAWAF while in a state of JANABAH or menstruation, or participating in the ZIYARAH TAWAF without ABDEST, and so on. If any of these prohibitions is committed during the QIRAN Hajj, 2 sacrifices, dem, are required to preserve the sanctity of the 2 IHRAMS. Since these acts are performed by intention, one of the things that requires a sacrifice is if it is done due to a necessity or a valid reason. The person who performed the act is exempt. They may either sacrifice an animal in the haram, fast for 3 days in any location of their choice, or give charity equal to 1 FITRA amount to 6 poor people. It is more meritorious to give this charity to the poor of MECCA. Just as it is permissible to specify a recipient for this charity, it is also permissible to offer food as a gesture of hospitality. According to Imam Muhammad he is not permissible 2 murders for which a sacrifice of a camel or cow must be made. These include engaging in sexual relations before shaving or trimming one's hair after performing the standing at Arafat, as well as performing the visitation TAWAF while in a state of JANABAH, menstruation, or postnatal bleeding. However, if any TAWAF is performed again while in a state of purity, the penalty is waived. If sexual intercourse is repeated in a single session before shaving or trimming one's hair after performing the standing at Arafat, only 1 sacrifice, a camel or cow, is required. If the assembly changes, a sacrifice, a camel or cow, is required for the first act of sexual intercourse, and a dem, sheep, is required for the others. This is because the first act of sexual intercourse caused an imperfection in the tawaf. For such an incomplete tawaf, dem is sufficient. However, if sexual intercourse occurs after shaving or cutting the hair and before completing the entire visitation, tawaf or its first 4 circuits, sacrificing just 1 sheep is sufficient. Accordingly, if sexual intercourse occurs after the entire visitation tawaf or after the first 4 circuits, neither a sacrifice nor a fine is required as penalty. 3 murders for which a charity of half ASA, 1 FITRA amount, 520 dirhams must be paid for each incident. These include a person in ihram who applies a fragrant substance to a small part of one of their limbs, organs, wearing a stitched garment or covering one's head for less than a day, shaving less than 1/4 of one's head, cutting just 1 fingernail, shaving another person's hair, cutting another person's fingernail, or performing the tawaf al-qudum or the farewell tawaf while in a state of impurity are among such acts. Using a fragrant substance for medical treatment incurs a penalty, but using an oil such as olive oil does not incur penalty. It is also permissible to pull out a broken fingernail because it no longer has the potential to grow. 4. Prohibited acts, forbidden acts, for which a charity equivalent to 1 FITRA, or less than half ASA 520 dirhams of wheat, must be paid. These include actions such as a person in ihram killing a locust, killing a lice on one's own body, or throwing it on the ground, or pointing out a lice on another person's body in order to kill it. Anyone who commits one of these acts while in ihram must give charity in any amount they choose. If more than 3 lice are killed, charity equal to 1 FITRA must be given. It is not forbidden to kill a louse encountered along the way, and there is no penalty for doing so, because this is actually a harassing animal. IT is permissible to kill IT. A person in IHRAM must, until they exit IHRAM, present their need to the Almighty Allah in a state of despair and humility, and in a humble and modest state. And since they must present their needs to Almighty Allah, not dressing up serves as an expression of servitude and a sign of need. 5. These are prohibitions, offenses, for which a penalty (zamin) must be paid for each act committed. These include killing game animals while in ihram or cutting down or pulling up living trees and green grass within the haram area. For this reason, a person in ihram muhrim may not kill any land animal, whether within or outside the haram area, nor may they ask another person to kill it on their behalf. Furthermore, a person in ihram may not cut down living trees or green grass within the haram area. If they do so, they must pay compensation. That is to say, if the killed animal is one whose meat is not eaten, the penalty shall not exceed the sacrifice of a sheep or a goat. However, if it is an animal whose meat is permitted to be eaten, its value at the place where IT was killed is determined by 2 just persons, and the entire amount is given as charity. If this value is less than the amount of FITRA, fasting for 1 day in its place is sufficient. However, if the value is equal to that of a sacrifice, the one who committed the prohibition is exempt. If they wish, they may purchase a sacrificial animal with this value, slaughter it within the sacred precincts, and distribute the meat to the poor. Alternatively, they may purchase the FITRA amount of wheat, barley, or dates, with this value to be distributed to the poor. If they wish, they may fast 1 day for each amount of FITRA. This fast may be observed at various times. If the killed animal is one that has been trained for hunting, such as a hawk or a dog, then its value is paid to the owner, since IT was trained by them. Furthermore, if IT was not trained, its value is given to the poor, SAMs. As for trees and grass, if they have grown naturally and belong to nitrogen monoxide 1, their value is given as charity to protect the right to the haram area. However, if they belong to someone's property, their value must also be given to their owners. ITEs, permissible to take only the leaves of a tree in the haram area, provided it does not harm the tree. Therefore, nitrogen monoxide penalty is required.